Hi, and welcome to the show where we share the stories of the many who intersect with our healthcare system but are rarely heard from. My name is Kevin Poe, founder and editor of Kevin MD. Today, we have a special sponsored episode talking about biosimilar medications and why they matter to you. I'm joined by Tim DeGarve. He's Vice President and Chief Commercial Officer at Sandoz, where he's also a member of the Sandoz U.S. Executive Committee. Tim graduated with honors from the Wharton School with an MBA in Healthcare Management and cum laude from Princeton University. Find out more at sandoz.com. That's SANDOZ.com. Tim, welcome to the show.
Kevin, it's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
So we'll get into the meat of our interview in a little bit, but first off, just briefly share your story and journey to where you are today.
So Kevin, I've been working in healthcare for almost 25 years. And I started out in a small healthcare consultancy, went to venture capital, and then got my MBA. And I was working at McKinsey in New Jersey and was having a great time. I was actually living in New York. And I got this interview at this Sandoz place, and it was for biosimilars. And I didn't know what biosimilars were. And I thought it was a great opportunity to kind of practice my interview skills, right? So there's no way I was going to move to Munich where the position was based, leaving New York. And I went and I did the interviews. I met the people. And 3 months later, I was on a flight across the Atlantic, changing my life completely. And a lot of it was because of the passion and the dedication that I saw on the team that was really leading this biosimilar effort for Sandoz. I think it was also that people who were leading this business had been directly impacted. It was more than just patients, it was family members who had been denied access to these critical medicines because of cost. And it really brought the patient and it made it personal. And so when I joined Sandoz in 2010, this was something that was very personal. This was a mission that Sandoz was on to really improve access for these critical medicines to patients. And that patients meant family members, meant people very personal to this group. And Sandoz has really been a leader in this field. So we launched and got approved the first biosimilar in Europe in 2006 and in the US in 2015.
All right, so let's talk more about biosimilar medications and why they matter to you. Now, for those who might not be familiar, what exactly is a biosimilar medication and how do biosimilars differ from generic medications?
Yeah, so biosimilars kind of have this funny name, right? Biosimilar. So why are they similar? Well, biosimilars are basically FDA-approved biologics that are similar to a reference medication. They're similar because the medication we're talking about are proteins, and proteins are very complicated. They have inherent variability, but it goes through a rigorous regulatory process. And at the end, the regulatory authorities confirm that biosimilars have the same safety and efficacy as the reference product. And they go through clinical trials. They'll always have a little bit of this funny name of biosimilars because they can't be identical. If you think about generics come from chemistry, you can be certain that the molecular structure is identical for a small molecule, where you can't with a protein therapeutic. But what I always take solace in, and what really resonates with me, is that for the patient, there's no impact. You have the same safety and efficacy, and you can really feel confident in that because of the really stringent regulatory process this goes through with the FDA.
And what are examples of diseases or conditions that could be treated with biosimilar medications?
Well, where we've seen like a lot of impact in the US especially is in oncology. So in oncology, there have been a lot of products that have lost exclusivity where biosimilars have launched. Products like trastuzumab, bevacizumab, pegfilgrastim, filgrastim, which are products from Sandoz. And we've seen actually real acceptance from oncologists for biosimilars. They've been enthusiastic about using these products. They've seen the impact it's had in terms of savings. And they've also seen that the patients have responded very well to these therapies. Also in the field of rheumatology. So if you're talking about rheumatoid arthritis or psoriasis, or inflammatory bowel disease, Crohn's disease, these are also areas where biosimilars can have good impact.
So what are some specific cancers that biosimilars are used for?
Yeah, so biosimilars are similar to the reference products, right? And the reference products where biosimilars are coming to market, they're used in non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, follicular lymphoma, breast cancers, liver cancers, just really across the gamut of oncology indications. They also can be used for supportive care. So for neutropenia, like the filgrastim that Sandoz promotes here in the US. So really, they can be terrific therapies for many significant and serious oncology indications.
And why should healthcare prescribers, why should they feel confident in prescribing biosimilars?
Well, I talked a little bit about the therapeutic benefits, right? And the rigorous regulatory pathway that biosimilars need to go through. So first of all, you can feel confident that the regulators have really put this through a lot of scrutiny. These products have gone through clinical trials, and regulators aren't going to let something out that they have any concerns about. I think also for physicians, this is about making sure that there's the space and the budget to pay for that next round of innovation. And if you look at what's happened, with generics, I mean, prescribers have gotten very comfortable with prescribing generics when maybe 30 years ago, there was a lot of concerns around them. Now generics are accepted. And I think we're going to the same place with biosimilars, which again, have that significant regulatory scrutiny and can have a real impact on the next round of innovations for prescribers.
So let's say I'm an oncologist and I have a gamut of medications to prescribe. What kind of questions should I ask myself if I want to consider a biosimilar medication?
I think there's the first question around cost and the patient. And one of the things we've seen is that for patients, it can actually have a significant impact on out-of-pocket costs. So it can reduce a patient's cost by up to 45%, according to some studies. So there's first of, can you actually have a real impact on the patient by reducing their costs? I think then look at the data, right? And make sure that you're comfortable that the data that got the product approved shows the biosimilarity, and you feel comfortable that this product will have the same safety and efficacy as the originator product. And then I think it's, try it out with your patients and see how it works. There's no doubt that biosimilars have a huge impact on healthcare systems and the affordability of these medications. They make healthcare systems more sustainable. So if physicians want to work in a sustainable healthcare systems and continue to get innovations and have insurance companies pay for those innovations, this is a great way to do it.
When you say the benefits of biosimilars to patients, is there a story, case study, or an example that can really illustrate that point?
Yeah, so if you talk about Sandoz biosimilar filgrastim, which is Arxio, there was a study that demonstrated that patients had a 45% reduction of out-of-pocket costs when a biosimilar filgrastim was used. And that's real impact on patients and their ability to afford their healthcare. And when you think about your oncology patients that are having all of those issues with not only their disease, but then with insurance companies and trying to get, trying to afford their treatments, that can have a real impact on their ability to continue to sustain it. The other point to make here is, as biosimilars come and as the costs go down, the barriers to actually getting access to those products will go down. The step edits, the prior approvals, all of the tools that insurance companies use to manage costs, you will actually generally see those start to go away as biosimilars become cheaper. So patients can get access to these products faster.
And in general, when it comes to coverage, Medicare and private insurers, how broadly are biosimilars covered by insurances?
So it will depend on the reference product. So especially when you start, you'll see that they mimic a lot of what happens with the reference product. It's as costs continue to go down, as insurance companies begin to really realize those savings, that we hope to see more access for patients because those step edits go away. The other tools that insurance companies use to limit access will be eliminated. And that's really our goal as we work with insurance companies, is to get that access improved.
So it sounds like biosimilars have had a significant uptake in oncology. Are we seeing the same level of uptake across other areas? I think you had mentioned rheumatology earlier.
Yeah, and I think oncology has been a shining star. In other therapeutic areas, it's slower. And a lot of that is around education of the physicians, but it's also working with insurance companies, because insurance companies have a lot of power to control how fast switches happen. And what we do see is that there are elements of the US healthcare system that make switching from a reference to a biosimilar challenging from an economic perspective for the insurance companies, for the PBMs.
Today, we have a special sponsored episode about biosimilar medications and why they matter to you. I'm joined by Tim DeGarve. He is Vice President and Chief Commercial Officer at Sandoz, where he's also a member of the Sandoz U.S. Executive Committee. Find out more at sandoz.com. That's SANDOZ.com. Tim, what's happening with biosimilars in the U.S. market today, and how does this compare with other international markets?
So right now, there are 39 approved biosimilars in the US and 24 have launched, which sounds pretty good, right? If you actually look at Europe, there have been 86 biosimilars launched in Europe. So the reality is we're behind. And Europe had their first biosimilar, as I mentioned at the beginning, in 2006, when Sandoz launched its biosimilar growth hormone. It took until 2015 for a biosimilar to launch in the US. And that was mostly as a result of the Obamacare passage in 2010, or the BPCIA, which enabled a pathway for biosimilars in the US. Europe has a head start on us, right? So there's work to be done. And we also need to look at how can we reduce the barriers for acceptance of biosimilars in the US and ensure that there aren't kind of structural elements of the US healthcare system that inhibit the uptake of these products. The reality is they will save the US healthcare system money and enable more investment in future innovations and make the US healthcare system more sustainable. And that's something we should all get behind.
So it sounds like in Europe, there's almost double the number of biosimilar medications. And one reason is because they have a head start. Are there any regulatory differences between the US and Europe that would encourage them to have so many more biosimilars?
It's a good question. I think that it's just taken a little bit longer in the US to get the engine going around biosimilar approvals. I think now we're seeing that the FDA is really moving more quickly on biosimilars. And, one example is for the adalimumab launch, there's going to be almost 10 biosimilars launching when adalimumab loses exclusivity next year. That's an $18 billion drug, which is going to be huge for biosimilars. So we do see that it's gaining traction. I will say, I think Europe is more familiar and more comfortable with biosimilars from an approvable perspective. We also see in the US quite often some IP challenges in getting biosimilars to market, potentially some delays from that perspective. You have the famous patent dance with the BPCIA, which can sometimes limit or constrain the ability for biosimilars to launch. But we do see great progress in the US. And, I'm hopeful that over the next few years, we could have as many as 120 new products launch.
You talked earlier about the impact on healthcare costs that biosimilars has for individual patients. Now, from a macroeconomic perspective, what's the impact of biosimilars from healthcare costs from a U.S. healthcare perspective?
Yeah, so if you look at generics, in 2021 alone, generics saved the US healthcare system about $370 billion. Of that, biosimilars saved about $7 billion. And since 2015, they've saved about $15 billion for the US healthcare system. The big opportunity is, as we look forward, that it could be almost upwards of $185 billion by 2025. So there's a huge opportunity as we go forward to save the healthcare system money. The potential is still kind of to be realized. I mean, we're still contributing, right, to the overall healthcare savings. But if we get the good traction, if we get market acceptance, we do see that biosimilars could have a huge impact on healthcare savings by 2025.
You mentioned earlier that new biosimilars will be launching. Is the U.S. healthcare system prepared to support greater biosimilar adoption and uptake?
I come back to that point around the insurance companies and PBMs, right? We really will need, especially as we get into the retail space and products like adalimumab, we're going to need to see the insurance companies get behind biosimilars and really push their acceptance. And I think the concern that we all have is the economics typically favor the reference product, and it can be difficult for biosimilars to gain traction. I'm hopeful, though, that as we go forward, that will change and that we will see biosimilar uptake. We will see biosimilar acceptance. We need to make sure we're also educating physicians. Physicians are a huge part of this as well, that they understand, as we talked about earlier, the difficult regulatory path these products need to go through, that they can have confidence in the safety and efficacy of these products. And that'll go a long way also to supporting the uptake. I do think we have work to do. And adalimumab LOE next year, when 10 products launch for this $18 billion product, that will be a big test case. Are biosimilars able to get any uptake? What will happen with the reference products? How will insurance companies respond? And what will be physicians' reactions?
So you mentioned that there are some things that physicians can do to help with the uptake of biosimilars. So what are some examples of what individual physicians can do?
I think, look, when a biosimilar launches, try putting some patients on it. Try getting some experience with biosimilars, right? It's the right thing to do for our healthcare system, and it can be the right thing to do for your patients. And then as physicians get comfortable with biosimilars, move more patients onto them, and let's start getting market acceptance for these critical products. I think also really understanding the link between competition and innovation. If we don't have competition, there won't be future innovation. It's by really challenging these existing products that we push companies to drive that future innovation. I think if physicians understand that link and know that, okay, well, I've been using rituximab or trastuzumab for the past 15 years, why should I talk to you about a biosimilar? Well, it's because if we start using those biosimilars, guess what? The companies will need to innovate. They need to come up with new products to drive their financials. So we'll get that next round of innovation.
So I'm going to ask you next to look into your crystal ball. And what do you think will be the U.S. biosimilar landscape in the foreseeable future?
As technology continues to improve, the clinical hurdles for biosimilars will likely go down. So right now, you do a lot of analytical work at the beginning to understand the structure. You do a phase 1, then you do a phase 3. And the phase 3s can be quite big. And you do those phase 3s in one indication, and then you extrapolate that to other indications, assuming that it'll have the same effect in other indications. And as we get better at the analytical chemistry, and as the regulators get more comfortable, you may see less requirements around the phase 3, and you may actually speed the approvals of these products. Right now, it can cost hundreds of millions to develop a biosimilar. And I'm hopeful that as we go forward, the costs get closer to what it costs to develop a generic, which can be 10 to 15 million. And that will also then mean more products coming, more choices for physicians, more competition, and hopefully then that next round of innovation.
And my final question, Tim, what are some of your take-home messages that you want to leave with the Kevin MD audience?
Look, I know biosimilars have a funny name, but I think you can all be comfortable that they have the same safety and efficacy as the reference product. They go through a really rigorous regulatory review. They are scrutinized and only brought to market when regulators are 100% certain that patients will benefit from these products. I think also that link between biosimilars and innovation, that if you're investing in biosimilars, if you're saving healthcare systems money, there's two really positive things, right? First, healthcare systems can afford that next round of innovation. But the second thing is that competition will push companies to innovate. They're going to need to find those new products that can then also benefit patients, improve patients' lives, extend patients' lives. So biosimilars do, although they're copies, they do drive innovation. So they're safe, they're effective. They help make healthcare systems sustainable, and they will help drive that next round of innovations for patients and physicians.
Tim, thank you so much for sharing your time and insight. Find out more at sandoz.com. That's SANDOZ.com. Thank you so much for listening.
Kevin, thank you.